even though people want to take well, viruses don't exist or it can't be man-made because if I accept that, then things aren't as bad as I think. Well, that's kind of sad because what you're really saying is you don't see a way of reconciling viruses existing and humans manipulating it and you surviving.
Yes.
Well, the reality is you're designed to survive. Just because those viruses don't leave your body, just because the SARS-CoV-2 viruses, and like HIV, can reverse transcribe or get into your DNA, doesn't mean you will always be making that. The question is, why would you make it? Why would you make it? And the answer is your immune system fails, so it finds an opportunity to get out, or there's something that says make more of this. And there's a need to scientifically explain it. So what I've been doing, a couple of weeks ago, I went to the VCICI conference in Florida and gave 2 talks on SARS-CoV-2, CRISPR technology, what we know about the science, what we know about different drug treatments on these pathways. Why do the cancers occur? Why does sudden cardiac death occur? Why are the miscarriages occurring? I mean, this data is all there. All these blood tests that everybody is are so infatuated with because we have blood tests, right? So we all know we can get blood tests and you can
Yeah.
get lipids and you can get electrolytes. But the problem is that that's all downstream data. It's like cancer markers. Those are
Yeah. You already.
downstream data. You only get that type of data when there's so much damage within the tissue that those enzymes and substances are spilling out and now they're collectible in the bloodstream. So to use those as a marker, we published the data on it when we did the quantification Fleming method and compared it to blood test results. And what happened is we saw no correlation at all between measured tissue disease and blood test results. This is the test that I was developing as I was exposing big pharma and the lies and figuring out that we weren't measuring anything. We were visually guessing at a lot. And in reality, we were missing about a third of our data when we were missing on these pretty images. But because qualitative, looking at the appearance of something gives you a yes, no, you can either be right or wrong. That's the sensitivity specificity errors. But when you're measuring something, it's distinctly different because then you're asking how accurate is that measurement? And depending upon where you push them on the spectrum, you see different things. So when you see more blood flow and less clotting, you end up with cancers.
Okay.
When you see less blood flow and more clotting, you get miscarriages, heart attacks, diabetes, strokes, all of those things. So it's where you're at on the spectrum.
Welcome to Health Alliance Australia. My name is Jeannie Rose Angewartha. I have been working in the health advocacy space since 2011 and with Health Alliance since early 2023. You may know me from LinkedIn and my articles are known as a censored writer and also hold a degree in statistics. I'll be your host today as Dan Hansen is away. Health Alliance is an organisation that raises and donates money towards legal actions related to opposing COVID-19 vaccines and mandates and harmful public health measures. And we have donated over 200,000 to date in legal actions. We also provide health advocacy related information on our website, healthallianceaustralia.org. You can subscribe to our newsletter, donate or join as a member. Today, I welcome a very special guest, Dr. Richard Fleming, physicist, nuclear cardiologist, attorney, PhD, MD, JD, 57 years of scientific research experience. He is not only a world authority on health and medical science, but the authority on SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19. A true warrior for health and justice, no friend of Big Pharma, his CV, and Big Pharma, no friend of his. His CV is extensive and impressive. He developed the Fleming method for tissue and vascular differentiation and metabolism, which is the only non-invasive method available to quantitatively measure changes happening inside the body, changes that occur with heart disease, cancer, and COVID-19. This is really important because it allows physicians to diagnose disease early and to assess the protocols and therapies being used and adjust accordingly. I have his book, Stop Inflammation Now, right here. Just right here. Actually, I have 2 copies of this book. I felt it was so important. A step-by-step plan to prevent, treat, and reverse inflammation and heart disease. Written in 1994, this book helped me to heal from heart disease in 2011. He actually saw my story online a few years ago, reached out to me by email, and here we are today, both fighting for humanity. He's the author of Is COVID-19 a Bioweapon? A Scientific and Forensic Investigation, and minced with protein fantasy. To be clear, he means both the jab, the engineered gain of function virus, with the spike protein leading to cancer, heart disease, neurological disease, and many other conditions. Today, we'll be discussing Dr. Fleming's Unified Theory and SARS-CoV-2, the big picture of the jab, infection, and shedding are doing in the body and ways to recover. Links to his website, 10letters.org, his social media, and FlemingMethod.com will be in the description and on our website. Welcome, Dr. Fleming, today.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah. So I thought we could start today with SARS-CoV-2 and why, the origins of it. I think I showed you, I might just screen share it. Well, maybe I won't screen share it, but I think I showed you before what appeared in the Australian news. It was
yes.
this was in July, where they kind of admitted to the gain of function research, actually here in the paper, in Australia,
right.
COVID cover-up, how science was silenced, which I think is probably fairly consistent with what your book has said about COVID-19 being a bioweapon. But I think at the end of that article, they kind of said, oh, we're still not 100% sure on it, but it actually appeared in the mainstream news weekend. It's actually the better of the newspapers, if for mainstream news, that
right.
I would say, in terms of Australia, the premium level.
Well, the interesting thing about science is you're basically trying to put the pieces of information together to get as good an answer to the question that you have. And the question about, is COVID-19 a bioweapon? Short of them coming forward and saying, yes, we built it,
yeah.
you have to look at the evidence and the information that's there. And what we do in the book is to lay out some of, not all of, the information, but enough information for the general public to look at it and say, wow, okay, clearly, more than $60 million, which now seems like a drop in the bucket the way we're throwing money out. But for the last couple of decades, that was a substantial amount of money, more than half of which was funded by the United States Department of Defense, and then Health and Human Services and National Institutes of Allergies, Infectious Diseases. When you trace those monies, those grant monies, to whom they went to, and then the research that was published by those individuals, you're left uncomfortably looking at RS 3367, SHC 014, and then MA15 as 3 viruses that, when you look at the PCR data, match what's called SARS-CoV-2.
Okay.
So, all 3 of those viruses are man-made viruses. Gain of function means humans took something that was naturally occurring and modified it, either to make it more infectious or to make it more pathologic, more harmful, or both. People like to say it's one or the other, but it isn't necessarily. I mean, viruses in and of themselves, these small little organisms that must have a host to survive because they don't have all the genetic and all the cellular materials that our cells do. So they have to use animal cells
Yeah.
to reproduce themselves. Um, so they're dependent upon not killing off their hosts, and so they balance that. But and hopeful, I think, for the general audience is the recognition that if viruses and bacteria and parasites and all the other things that can infect people can be handled, then even a virus that is modified or manipulated by people eventually can be handled. The
Yes.
question is, it's important to know that it has been made by people, because you need to understand why it's able to do what it does so that you can determine how to deal with it.
Yeah.
Hopefully that made sense.
Yes.
I mean, that's what our research did early on in 2020 was I sat down and asked fundamental questions. What do we know about viruses? Which drugs do we know that work? And I was specifically looking for 4 things. I was looking for drugs that interfere with the virus being able to attach. Now, ACE2 receptor is what most people have heard.
Yes.
But it turns out that that's the second attachment site. It's just the one that everybody's heard of. The first attachment site is how this SARS-CoV-2 virus spike protein attaches to the NER5AC receptor, which is not something you've heard about. But the NER5AC receptor is one of the things that separates humans from many other animals. Most other animals take that NER5AC and they convert it to NER5GC. We can't do that. So anything that's a NER5GC animal, beef, pork, lamb, is an antigen to us. It's a foreign protein that we don't have, and we react to it that way. We cause an inflammation and blood clotting to it, and that's part of what was included in that original Fleming unified theory. But that spike protein first swings into that NER5AC receptor and then goes up to the ACE2 receptor.
Okay.
That NER5AC receptor is important because it is attached to the spike protein by the glycoprotein 120 that was put into that spike protein of that virus by Shizheng Li in her early work in the early 1990s. She was working on taking the HIV virus, a pseudo HIV virus, with its glycoprotein 120 and connecting that up with the SARS-CoV virus, the original virus. And, in the book, Is COVID-19 a Bioweapon? You can read about that research. It's right there in plain sight. We have collected in what we're doing, the 10letters.org campaign to indict the criminals responsible for doing this, because these are criminal actions. We've not only collected the affidavits from the experts involved, but every one of the papers, all the research, all the documents from the federal government, all the documents from the published research, we have all of that saved. So if they go and they wipe the internet clean, it doesn't matter to me, because we've still got it. Sorry, the library, we assembled the library before they could wipe it. And that was part of what I was doing when everybody was saying, well, aren't you making any progress? I was making progress, but the attorney hat now going on, I needed to get all the documents saved and protected and secured, and then multiple copies made. And that took a lot longer than I anticipated. It wasn't the only thing I was working on at the time, but we have over 9,800 documents.
Wow.
On a USB drive that explains viruses and these viruses and the drugs and the genetic vaccines and everything connected with it. And to give people a flavor of what that means, most people have seen the emails, those notorious emails from Anthony Fauci and other people talking about the origins. Well, those emails, I think there's over 1,000 pages of them. That's
Yep.
one document.
Wow.
That's one document. So everything, independent of how long it is, it's still a document. We have over 9,800 documents. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of information there.
So these
So
things
we
that
look,
they engineered the virus were they to make it more deadly and more infectious? Was that
Well, again, that's one of those things that we're only going to know if they want to answer that question. What we know is that it made them more infectious and more deadly.
okay? So we
So
can't really
was
we
that
can't speak to motive. We can just speak to
right? I
evidence.
can't speak to why another human being did it. I mean, I can come up with all sorts of hypotheticals, legal term hypotheticals where you play it out, and I can argue what I think they were doing, but they're going to have to defend that in court. All I need to do is show, wait a minute, this is clearly not man-made, and it's had a devastating impact. I mean, I don't know what the total world numbers are. I'm more familiar with the US numbers, but I can tell you that in the United States, more than 1.1 million Americans died from the disease COVID.
Yeah.
That equals the number of deaths that the United States military has had since 1776.
Wow. Yeah.
The vaccines from the vaccine adverse events have more than 1.5 million injuries to date, accepted. And I don't need to speculate, and I won't speculate how much of the numbers is that. If 1.5 million does not get your attention, 15 million or 150 billion isn't going to do any more. 1.5 million should get your attention. And why is that significant? Because that's more injuries than the US military has had injuries since 1776. We've got another 550,000 deaths from the inflammothrombotic diseases, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease from the prion effect, cancers. Of those 550 to 560,000, only 28,000 are pneumonias. The
Yeah.
rest are all
People are dying of
inflammothrombotic.
other things, aren't they? It's
They're
not
dying of, right.
because I think a lot of times people think, okay, in terms of COVID and COVID deaths, but we're looking at it in terms of the infection, even the wild virus, whatever the Wuhan strain, whatever strain is out there. We're actually just most people saying, oh, did they die of COVID? Did they not die of COVID? But what you're saying with the bioweapon is that people can die of multiple things, whether it's heart disease, it can trigger cancer, neurological issues, sudden death.
If you get infected with SARS-CoV-2 and it causes an inflammothrombotic response, you can't have inflammation without blood clotting. Everybody wants to just say inflammation. Well, if that's the case, why is everybody calling them clot shots, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's admitting there's thrombi, clots, right? So you don't get inflammation without blood clotting. You don't get blood clotting without inflammation. It's inflammothrombotic response. And if my use of the term inflammation and heart disease has dumbed that understanding down, then I accept responsibility for dumbing that down. And it was, but the reality is, I think we've all come a long way, and we can all learn to say inflammothrombotic. And if what comes into you, this virus, causes that inflammation and blood clotting so that you die from these types of diseases, well, that caused it. It's kind of like you get into a car crash, and then it causes internal bleeding, and you die from the bleeding. Well, you wouldn't have died from that bleeding had you not been in a car crash.
That's right. Yeah.
Right?
And then I
So
think, do you feel like people need to get this virus out of them after they've had, like it obviously can hide in the body at times? I mean, how are the protocols there to remove the virus from them? Is it because,
right.
there's that whole talk, I guess, about natural immunity. You've had it once. therefore you won't have it again. And we know that doesn't happen. Like, we know now that people are getting this multiple times, vaxxed or unvaxxed. People are catching, and every time
Right.
it seems to be an assault on the immune system. It seems to be taking a little bit of the life force from people every time, till they perhaps die of something else or get very, very sick.
Right.
So I feel like, in terms of people's overall health, we need to raise the health status of people by other means. I think you discuss it well in your book.
Yeah, so one of the important things for people to realize is that once you get an infection, you always have that infection. A good example for people to understand is varicella or chickenpox,
Yep.
right? I mean, this is one that most people are aware of. And then later on in life, what happens? People get herpes zoster, or also called shingles. That's that same virus just re-expressing itself. Why does it re-express itself? Well, it does that because the person's immune system starts to fail.
Yep.
They have other health problems. They don't take care of themselves, and the virus re-expresses. We're seeing that with people infected with SARS-CoV-2. Other viruses re-emerging, Epstein-Barr, hepatitis, HIV, a variety of other viruses re-expressing themselves. Some of them are cancer promoters, just like SARS-CoV-2 is a cancer promoter for a variety of reasons. But again, just because that's the reality, that you never get rid of it, that doesn't mean that you just got a death sentence.
Right.
You know, we have somehow adopted this attitude in oncology and cancer, especially. You have cancer, you're going to die. Wow. We used to have that with heart disease, right? You have a heart attack, yeah, you're going to die. No. In fact, in the 1960s, we kept people in bed for a week to 10 days because we were afraid to exercise their heart muscle. And then when they got up, they died, right? And we discovered that that was the wrong thing to do. We needed to get people up and start reconditioning and strengthening their heart so their heart could recover, so it wouldn't continue to form a larger and larger scar, so that you could recover. Heart failure patients have this mentality that somebody has an ejection fraction 10-15%. I mean, the lowest heart failure patient, which is a garbage can term, by the way, that's a cluster of diseases, that I've taken care of, had a left ventricular systolic ejection fraction of 8%. And, we improved that. You can improve that. Postpartum cardiomyopathy, as I was explaining before we went on the air, two of the people that trained me in heart failure was one of the things that I first got known for as a cardiology fellow. The woman who pioneered the concept of diastolic dysfunction, or a stiff heart, when it's trying to relax and fill with blood, and postpartum cardiomyopathy, those two people trained me as a fellow. So I was blessed with that. That was just another one of those opportunities that I had in my life to actually be trained by the people who pioneered it, like Denton Cooley and Michael DeBakey trained me, and those folks. Gerald Nacarelli for electrophysiology. And one thing you learn, hopefully, is that things that you think can't be treated can be treated. You can do things to recover, whether it's heart function or to recover from these viruses. I mean, we know, and part of what I've put on Fleming method and I'm doing now for the medical community is explaining, we know there are a lot of drugs that are effective at not only preventing the attachment of the virus, but the other three things that I was looking at was the replication of the virus and the inflammothrombotic response, both in the early phase of immune response and the latter phase of immune response, so T cells and antibodies. We know there are drugs that are useful for that. We know there are drugs that are useful for treating the cancer pathways, the 9 cancer pathways, hispidulin, high-dose vitamin C, a number of other antibody drugs that are available for the right reason. There are E64D or atorvastatin is a drug that is tremendously effective not only on the prion disease, but for people with head trauma. So it's the combination of some of the drugs that are out there by Big Pharma. Not everybody in Big Pharma is bad. Just because I've dealt with some bad people doesn't mean everybody is bad. There are really good people in Big Pharma that have done some very, very good work. I know of a person who is working on genetic diseases right now who is very upset that the work that he's done, because he's interested in genetic heart disease, has been manipulated by somebody by the name of Barrick at the University of North Carolina with gain of function.
Yeah.
So here's a man who's trying his darndest to contribute to the science and to make life better, particularly for children and later adults with congenital heart disease. While you've got other people out there like Barrick manipulating it. So you've got good people and bad people. And I would just implore people to understand that the answer for this isn't one extreme or the other extreme. It is not just prescription medications. And I go through this conversation, this hopefully by reading my books, that I will argue that vitamins and minerals and nutrition is a foundation of allopathic medicine. Now, that may not be the experience that most people are getting from their allopathic doctor, their MD, but it's foundation in allopathic medicine. So if it's not being used, that's not on me and it's not on allopathic medicine. It's on the people that are being trained that aren't then using it. But there's great data showing the roles of vitamins A, B, C, D, and E in these in these viruses and in cancers. So we know this is there, and there's good, well-published data showing cancers that didn't respond, for example, to the treatments. And then when high doses of vitamin C were added, wow, not one or the other, but it had to be both. Both were needed to really get the substantial benefit. We know, so hopefully what that did is to reinforce it. Just because viruses come and they stay in you doesn't mean you can't stay healthy and control them. Okay, number one.
So essentially you're saying not to put your head in the sand and the viruses don't exist, or the whole
right.
We were talking about this before, that people have moved to this position where they'll say, oh, viruses don't exist, they've never been isolated. Anyone that says it is some sort of controlled opposition in order to bring forth the next pandemic and more restrictions.
Right.
But what we're essentially saying, yes, viruses do exist. They can be harmful, but your body is able to mount an immune response to it with supportive either treatments or nutrition as a foundation,
right.
The right supplements, the right lifestyle choices like sleeping, sunshine, all of those positive things that you can do, even your thoughts. I think, the whole pandemic has really brought out a kind of a negativity, and
yeah, and you don't have to go too far down the thought process. I mean, you probably know I have a master's in psychology as well, but you don't have to go too far down that pathway before you realize that it has an effect on cortisol.
Yes.
That overly stressed human beings have an effect on cortisol, which is critical to maintain a healthy immune response, a healthy heart, healthy, you name it. So you don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to get too far out there and say, well, I have to believe in something mystic or whatever to believe. And there's a real, if nothing more, cortisol explains a huge body-mind connection and the impact of that. If you're constantly living under a stress condition, you're fatiguing your body and your body's ability to deal with any health issues that confront it. It's very critical, and you mentioned it, to get the right amount of sleep so your body can recover and repair and get ready for the next day. and what we saw at the very beginning of this in particular were people not exercising, not getting outside, not eating healthy, eating garbage, gaining weight. I mean, obesity is a huge contributor to inflammothrombotic diseases. We know this. We've been monitoring this for years. In heart disease, there's something known as the waist to hip ratio, which is basically how big is that belly?
Yeah.
Because it's those fat cells that are responsible for much of this inflammothrombotic response. And it's more than just cytokines. People talk about cytokine storm. Cytokine storm is nothing more than a cute name that was given by Big Pharma to explain the bad consequences for what's called CAR T cell therapy. So CAR T cell therapy is nothing more than gain of function research. It's taking and applying gain of function to your T cells and then putting them back in your body. And so when it was first starting to be used, there were all these bad side effects. And patients said, well, we don't know if we want to do that. I mean, we're getting sicker. And the answer was, we'll give it a term, cytokine storm. Oh, we have
Yeah.
a term. And now, well, we have a term, Mrs. Jones, it's to be expected that, your CAR T cell therapy will do this to you. It's called cytokine storm. Oh, okay. you know, but um, cytokine storm, that's the wheels. That's the four wheels of the car. Inflammothrombotic response is the vehicle. So
Yeah.
if you think that they're the same thing, I encourage every parent to go tell their kids that they're going to go buy them a car and then go buy them 4 tires and put it outside the house and say, I got you a car. And then look at the response of the kids when they go, you didn't get me a car, you got me 4 tires.
Yeah.
Well, just sit in between there and pretend to drive, right? So it's not the same thing.
No, and I think what you're talking about with the unified theory, from my reading of it, was there's this balance, the homeostatis balance between the body using inflammation in order to rid itself of disease and the overreaction where you have this, I can't say the word, response that is over the top and is causing
Right.
all sorts of other health issues. And it's sort of bringing people back to homeostatis. And
Yeah. So, yeah, and we know about this. I mean, cardiology is a big teacher of this. We used to have, so there's a drug known as Herudin, and Herudin is basically leech venom. And when I was a cardiology fellow, we were testing Herudin with people who were having blood clots, having myocardial infarction or heart damage from their blood clot in their arteries of their heart. And so we would bring them into hospital and we would treat them. We would take them to the cardiac cath lab and we would give them Herudin. And I remember when we first started seeing them in, and I walked into the coronary care unit after the first patient, and it looked like somebody had taken a machete to this man's face. I was like, what happened to my patient? And the nurses said, well, he wanted to shave, so we gave him a razor. Yeah, and the standing joke at the time, and sorry if people don't think this is funny, but in medicine, you develop a sense of humor like this or you don't survive. I said, the standing joke is, Mrs. Jones, good news, bad news. Good news, your husband didn't die from his myocardial infarction, his heart attack. Bad news, he bled to death because of the Herudin I gave him and he shaved, So
oh,
the system has to have balance. And if you press it too much one direction or the other, you have a problem. So why inflammothrombosis? Well, when something is in your body that shouldn't be there, your body, it starts to kill cells. Your cells go to attack it and those cells die. And when they do that, they release chemicals and that causes swelling and redness. But it also causes blood clotting. And the blood clotting does two things. The blood vessels clot the area to prevent nutrients from getting to the invader, and it clots to prevent the invader from getting out. So everything that goes on with all of these diseases, heart disease, strokes, COVID-19, high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, these are all issues where there's inflammation and blood clotting going on. And depending upon where you push them on the spectrum, you see different things. So when you see more blood flow and less clotting, you end up with cancers.
Okay.
When you see less blood flow and more clotting, you get miscarriages, heart attacks, diabetes, strokes, all of those things. So it's where you're at on the spectrum. And as you probably just figured out, you don't want to be over here and you don't want to be over here. You want to be in that sweet spot where homeostasis or balance is achieved, where there's just enough of everything going on to prevent the bad things from going on and keep you healthy. You can help in a lot of ways via what you put in your body, healthy diet, healthy lifestyle, the vitamins and minerals. When you need medications, the right medications in the right amount, more is not necessarily better. You have to find what works for each and every human being, which is where we were talking about Fleming method before we went live, which is it's the only method that can quantify what's going on in the body. So it doesn't make a mistake. It doesn't miss disease or say you have disease when it doesn't. It says, where are you at on the spectrum? It's an accuracy thing, and it's been calibrated to be accurate. And with that accuracy, you can, what's the health of your brain, your liver, your spleen, your heart, your lungs? Find a problem, select a treatment, then repeat Fleming method, or FMTVDM as I called it, but Fleming method because that's easier to remember. And then measure, did that work for you, for your problem? That's what we did for COVID patients to find the treatments that actually work. So in the end, even though people want to take well, viruses don't exist or it can't be man-made because if I accept that, then things aren't as bad as I think. Well, that's kind of sad because what you're really saying is you don't see a way of reconciling viruses existing and humans manipulating it and you surviving.
Yes.
Well, the reality is you're designed to survive. Just because those viruses don't leave your body, just because the SARS-CoV-2 viruses, and like HIV, can reverse transcribe or get into your DNA, doesn't mean you will always be making that. The question is, why would you make it? Why would you make it? And the answer is your immune system fails, so it finds an opportunity to get out, or there's something that says make more of this. So most of our DNA, believe it or not, is it's called promoters or inhibitors that say, yeah, go ahead and make that part of the DNA. Most of our DNA is that. 18% of our DNA is something called long interspersed nucleotide elements 1, which is the genetic sequence to take outside DNA or RNA and put it into our DNA. So there has to be a benefit, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, 18%, that's almost 1/5, right? 20%, 1/5. There has to be some benefit for doing that, but there also then has to be control mechanisms. And if you have something like SARS-CoV-2 or the genetic vaccines going into your DNA, then the question is, first, you have to have a reason for your cells to make that. And number two, every time you do make it and your DNA opens up, you have repair mechanisms that are designed to correct errors. You don't have to remove all of the junk DNA, for lack of a better term. If you just change one or two things about that junk DNA, it'll no longer be junk DNA. It'll be inert. It'll be non-existent as far as being produced by anything, right? If you change that spike protein with a couple of amino acids or nucleotides, it's no longer that spike protein. It's no longer causing the problem. So you clip out a couple of those just by repairing your DNA, and it doesn't matter that it's there. It's just
the body
quiet.
will eliminate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So from what you're saying, I'm hearing that even those people who've been vaccinated by this bioweapon, there is hope for them. that if obviously
Yeah.
it's starting from a different level of what needs to be done. I think we're all being challenged now. The fact that they've released this thing into the environment, it's endemic, it's there now. So in terms of health status, we may not get away with what we might have got away pre the pandemic, pre the release of this thing. So in terms of the jabs, say, having to recover, they can still recover with the immune system. Obviously, it depends on a lot of factors like age, is that what you're saying? What they do for immune support, supplements, the treatments, perhaps even the drugs that they might be prescribed to put them on that scale, as you were saying.
Yeah, absolutely. And your job is to improve the health of your body. And, you know, the responsibility of the medical community is to learn the information and then to apply it to patients. And the responsibility of the patients is to work on their health, which means going to the physician, getting the medications that are necessary, but doing the other things that you should be doing. I mean, I used to have patients come to me and say, Dr. Fleming, we'd like to get a nuclear study to see if we have heart disease. And I would say, okay, do tell, why do you want a study, right? Well, because if I get this study and it shows I have heart disease, I'm going to change my diet and lifestyle.
Okay. Yep.
All right. Now you can imagine how well that went over with me. So I would say, so you want a study to tell you whether you have heart disease. And if it says you have heart disease, you're going to change your diet and lifestyle to what you should be doing. But if it doesn't, you're going to continue with the same diet and lifestyle that you have been doing until you get to the point that you have heart disease, at which time then you're going to change your diet and lifestyle. Why are you not now changing your diet and lifestyle? If you know that this is what you need to do, why would you wait until you have a problem or till you have more of a problem? So no, I won't do a nuclear study for you. I won't do these other tests for you because I'm not going to do it. So you will make the decision to do the right thing. You need to make that decision, right? And that's where everybody is really at,
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I've had someone say, I know your book is essentially a plant-based diet in the book. And of course, that comes with a whole can of worms. And
right.
Now, I don't know if you've seen within, I guess, society, there's a real move towards carnivore diets, keto and all of that sort of things, which kind of, from my reading of what you're saying, goes against the science in terms of heart disease.
Yeah.
And because our bodies are not responding to it. Like, you're not saying, I don't think you not to eat meat at all, but really to limit it, essentially. And if you are healing from heart disease, the best option is to not have it at all.
Yeah, the reality was to try to sort. Yeah, you're doing a great job. I mean, the reality is I'm anti-stupid. That's what I am. I'm anti-stupid. I don't have this emotional attachment to meat. The reality is, and you froze up. It's a great picture. The reality is, my family, I'm Viking bloodline, and so Vikings are very big into transportation, education, farming, and textiles. That's basically what we dominate on. I grew up. My father's side of the family had a restaurant food chain that I worked in as a teenager growing up. It was a rite of passage. My cousins, who are also Flemings, have steakhouses and P.F. Chang's all over the United States. So, if you want to contribute to the wealth of my cousins, go for it. I don't have an emotional attachment one way or the other. My focus is what causes health problems in people, and these antigens that are in the diets, your body recognizes as not you, not human, and it responds to it. So That has clearly had a lot of people not very happy with it. But again, it's not because I'm pro anything other than just getting to the truth, the answers.
Yeah. So in terms of the unified theory, in terms of nutrition, what would you say, is that, say, the optimum for what people should have? Fairly alkaline diet?
No,
Like, how would people support themselves? Like, are you standing by what you've written in the book
yeah,
in 1994?
So yes, I stand by everything that's in those books. And I'm pescatarian, if anybody cares, because it seems that a lot of people want to know what I actually eat.
Yeah.
But my focus is, look, the things that tip you over are anything that is anogenic. So if you're eating land animals, it's anogenic. Sorry, it's not me. I didn't come up with it. It's just the science. But the things that I think people need to do as far as dietary wise is obviously control calories. I mean, a second grader can tell you what happens if you eat too many calories. You get fat. If you get fat, you make fat. If you make fat, it's bad for you, particularly trans fats, because they don't bend and they stick in things, and then they cause irritation. They cause an inflammatory thrombotic response. And I don't care where that trans fat comes from. I don't care if it's an animal source. I don't care if it's a plant source. It doesn't matter. I mean, we talked about this beforehand. There were oils that I mentioned eliminating in the books that people don't get right up front because they're reading it for what they want. You don't eat garbage. You don't eat excess calories. You don't eat things that cause an inflammatory thrombotic response. You don't eat these saturated, particularly trans fats. You don't eat refined processed garbage. And you don't eat, I've never told anybody to go on a Santa Claus diet, a high sugar diet. There's no, it doesn't suggest that because, I'm trying to get you to not do other things, that I think you should go out there and start downing bags of CNH sugar. Although, that's not to attack CNH sugar. It's just a statement that, nowhere in that did I say these other things were good. Now, my parents would have told you that, and they didn't have any of the degrees that I had, but clearly they knew from the food industry. And I think most intelligent people would tell you to not eat things that in those categories, right? And that's what I have concerns with. I know that some of the people that I've had to deal with in the media, in the news with these particular diets, I know these people had heart disease that they were covering up because I know the behind the scenes data. But I'm not going to share that data because that's an ethical violation on my part. And it has nothing to do with anybody else's ethical obligation. It's my ethical obligation, where information that I know about somebody in particular is really not somebody else's business. If you want to know what somebody's health is, you go ask them. Don't ask me. So I think that's the crux of that. And then in the unified theory, I simply looked at as a result of all these dietary and lifestyle issues, what really happens to all these other factors that come in, homocysteine and lipoprotein little a and fibrinogen and infectious diseases, how all of these play a role in causing more of this inflammatory thrombotic response and the diseases that it causes. My job is to sort it out. And part of what I've done in my research is I've also looked at all these blood tests that everybody are so infatuated with, because we have blood tests, right? So we all know we can get blood tests and you can get lipids and you can get electrolytes. But the problem is that that's all downstream data. It's like cancer markers. Those are downstream data. You only get that type of data when there's so much damage within the tissue that those enzymes and substances are spilling out and now they're collectible in the bloodstream. So to use those as a marker, we published the data on it when we did the quantification Fleming method and compared it to blood test results. And what happened is we saw no correlation at all between measured tissue disease and blood test results. Now, we did see if you start at point A and you know where somebody's tissue disease is and where their lipids are, for example, and you monitor them over the time, then there is a correlation with changes in tissue disease and changes in lipids. But that first blush comparison, there's no correlation at all, which means that downstream marker, that blood test, using that to say, oh, I'm healthy or I'm not healthy is not valid. It's not the tissue level, and it's at the tissue level that the disease is, not what's floating through the bloodstream. You know, I used to get residents and fellows and interns and students that would present to me in morning rounds when somebody who came in, they had a heart attack, and they would go, well, Mr. Jones has he doesn't smoke and he's non-diabetic and there's no family history and his total cholesterol is this and his LDL is that. And I'm looking at electrocardiogram and blood work that shows he just had an MI, a heart attack, right?
Mm.
And I will then look at the students and I'll go, so what's the point of what you're telling me? Well, I thought you'd like to know the risk factors because they help determine if somebody is going to have a heart attack. And I said, don't you think that the number one marker of whether the person had a heart attack might be, I don't know, the electrocardiogram that shows he had a heart attack?
Yes.
So you can tell me that he has no risk factors and shouldn't have had a heart attack, but here's the electrocardiogram.
And I
he
guess
had a heart attack, right?
And I guess people would want to know, like, say, for example, they've taken the vaccine or they feel like they've been a victim of shedding or they've had some post-COVID syndrome. What sort of tests should they be looking at, or should they be looking at symptoms? Because I know for a fact that people have, you know, they've had a vaccine, they've had a reaction, they've got chest pains, they report to hospital. Hospital does a battery of tests on them. They say, oh, we can't find anything, but can you go to your GP and get a Medicare where you basically get a script to get 5 psychological and appointments.
I'm sorry, I probably shouldn't laugh at that. I just
because we think after these tests, we've done these tests that we can't find anything wrong, so it must be in your head.
Right.
Obviously, that's not very helpful to people who are actually sick, and there needs to be. I mean, people have talked about, you know, D-dimer tests, you know, live blood analysis. What would you say if someone wants to know what's going on in their body?
Yeah. Well, to begin with, my fallback to that would be that's part of what we're going to start looking for with Fleming method, because we know that part of what's going on is priogenic disease. Now, from the heart perspective, the tests that most doctors are running for your heart aren't going to show you prion disease. Those are nuclear imaging tests that do that. And we know for a fact, we've seen in people that have heart disease, myocarditis. It's not myocarditis. That's the inflammation part. That's the simple, easy entry understanding for a cardiologist. But we know that these spike proteins, whether they're coming from the viruses or from the genetic vaccines that make the spike protein that are priogenic, that there's amyloid disease of the heart going on. And that's important because that amyloid disease is one of the components that sets you up for sudden cardiac death from your heart stopping its rhythm. And we also know that to find that, you need to do specialized nuclear imaging tests to find it. And doctors aren't doing that. So one thing is that, you know, if you're not doing the right test, you won't find the problem, right? One of the, and it's important because if you treat somebody like they have an inflamed heart, myocarditis, and it's due to the prion effect, you'll kill them. You will end up killing them. So it's important to distinguish that. We know that shedding is a real phenomenon. We know that because the U.S. government has admitted it's a problem. When did they do that? The 2017 paper that Health and Human Services and the FDA wrote to the industry about shedding and genetic vaccines. 2017, guidance to the industry. And then in 2020, they published, or 2021, they published a paper talking about shedding was the product of the vector, which means the spike protein is the product of the vector. We also know, as I've been telling people in recent presentations, that not only is it the spike protein, but furin that's released from cells in response to the furin cleavage site of this virus is shedding. And when it sheds, it causes these cancers and other things. And we also know, as I've been talking about for several years now, that there are something known as transmissible and transferable vaccines. So the difference is whether you inject it or whether it's a topical, you rub it on, can be transferred to somebody else. So that can be transferred. So you kind of have to know what you got exposed to know what to test for and how did it get into you. The problem with that is that it's almost impossible to differentiate whether it's a virus that got into you or a genetic vaccine that got into you with its shedding product. You can't differentiate them. The only differentiation is that if you do antibodies to the nucleocapsid, which is part of the spike protein, but not one of the genetic vaccines, then you can differentiate between virus or genetic vaccine. That being said, the question is, does it matter whether you test positive for it? And as I look at that as a physician, my answer is, it depends upon whether you're clinically presenting symptoms or whether we can measure actual damage to tissue. Under those latter two circumstances, now you have something to treat. Because if you don't have symptoms and you can't find tissue damage, now you're left with, you're going to take a medication, whether that's a vitamin or a mineral or a drug that's prescribed. And you're not going to have a way of measuring a benefit, but there will almost certainly, for some people, be a side effect. This is why I'm not a big proponent of prophylaxis, because how do you know that the benefit came from what you're taking, or you were just going to have that benefit because your body handled it? And the answer is you don't. You don't.
And of course,
Nobody
even
can tell you.
supplements can have negative side effects to
They can.
and throw you out of so people, especially, they're taking things long term, like we know, like with vitamin D, it can, put calcium where it's not meant to go. So if you're taking high dose vitamin D, that can happen. So in terms of, I know you talked about amyloidosis. And do you think that this is what they're seeing in terms of the white clots that are forming in people, or is that?
Right. So those white clots, I don't know if you're aware of it. I actually did research, and Dr. Kevin McCarron out of Japan did some of this early research with me, where I took the genetic vaccines and added them directly to human blood.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
And we have published that data. And it immediately turns the blood gray, which means it's no longer able to hold oxygen, which means the hemoglobin has been damaged. And it causes this inflammothrombotic blood clotting effect. Gray clotting blood. Need I say more? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what you're seeing. Gray clotted blood.
Yeah. So they're the white clots. All right. So in terms of the amyloids, from what I'm hearing you saying is that even from shedding, perhaps people could develop amyloidosis
Right.
from shedding.
They could. So
And
if you end up with
priogenics.
amyloidosis of the heart, there are drugs that can be used, including steroids, by the way, including, burst and taper steroids are one of the potential treatments for that. As far as the same amyloid disease causing Alzheimer's and prion diseases in the brain, the E64D, aloxastatin has been shown to be beneficial.
Yeah.
High dose niacin has been shown to be beneficial. 500 milligrams once, twice, 3 times a day has been shown to be beneficial. Most people don't like niacin because it causes flushing,
Yeah,
right?
I love niacin.
Well, that
Yeah.
flushing occurs because niacin causes a prostaglandin E2 release. And the consequence of prostaglandin E2 being produced is vasodilation or flushing phenomenon. And that is blocked by low-dose aspirin. Go figure,
Okay.
right? So if, when I explain to people you're going to be taking niacin, I tell them, you may notice flushing. You may not. Do you want to take a aspirin to block that, or do you want to see if you have flushing first?
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, I'm a proponent of saying, why don't you see if you're going to have flushing first, right?
Mm.
Why take the second drug for a side effect of the first drug if you don't even know if you're going to have that side effect? Find out
You
if you
can
have the side effect.
get used to the flushing. I mean, like the flushing is quite enjoyable after a while. Like I take niacin myself. I found that to be quite useful in terms of recovery. So,
Okay.
I don't mind the flushing. So in
No,
terms
and
of,
for you, it would be particularly helpful, for cardiac output.
yeah, like I find that, this is one of the supplements that I will take, as well as magnesium. High dose magnesium is also, I've always found to be very useful in terms of keeping the heart in good rhythm, as well as hydration. So back to the topic of the unified theory, in terms of SARS-CoV-2. How do you see that in terms of what we're talking about with HIV, in terms of people's immune systems now being compromised? I guess in terms of population-wide, I would say we are going to see people's health decline just simply because of what has happened, whether it's, the vaccine or, the engineered virus and shedding. So how will we lift the population's, health status?
Immune status.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, if you're somebody who took Paxlovid, I would be more concerned. The reason for that is, so I'll share some information that Professor Luc Montagnier and I were working on. One of the things that had been noticed early on when HIV was being investigated, so when you're looking for viruses, you have to do 2 things. They're too small to see. You can't see them like a bacteria. They're too small, right? So you do electron microscopy to see it, because that allows you to see something that small. But unfortunately, when you do electron microscopy, you kill what you're doing the electron microscopy of. So you can't do something with it after that. And so you do that for the visual, what's the anatomy, the structure of it. And then we genetically take things apart to define what something is, right? I mean, that's where we live in 2023, and we've lived there for a couple of decades. We no longer define things based upon whether they're round or green or red. We define them by your genetic code sequence.
Yeah.
That's how humans are defined, giraffes are defined, SARS-CoV-2 is defined. And you can go to FlemingMethod.com and go look in that 4th column, drop down, you'll see there's over 30,000 samples that were completely nucleotide-based sequenced out for the entire viruses. Most of it from early on when they were worried about the cruise ships and everything else. But so we noticed that when the protease inhibitors started being used for HIV, people got better, and then they got worse, really worse. And the electron microscopy data showed that the HIV viruses were being denuded. The outer part of the virus was being changed. And then what was noticed electron microscopically was small little particles showing up. Well, those small little particles, now we know, were glycoprotein 120, that insert that's gone into these spike proteins. So one of the concerns that both Luke and Professor Luke and I had up front was with the Paxlovid, we were concerned that it would denude the SARS-CoV-2. And in fact, you've seen people get worse after Paxlovid, and it appears to be doing the same thing. So that's one set of people. The folks who got Paxlovid, who had this denuding effect of the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein and this glycoprotein 120. Now, I would argue, because nobody has ever come into me and had me say, I guess there's nothing we can do for you. My brain simply says, what can we do for you? You know, because we're going to give you a fighting chance, or we're going to go after the offender, or whatever that might be. That's my job. One of my jobs. The MD hat, you know. And so I would argue that there is some real benefit on the glycoprotein 120 for the treatment, not only with some of the drugs that I've shown and put out there in Fleming method, whether that be clindamycin or some of the other drugs, or whether that be vitamin C, or whether it be niacin. There is some benefit that appears to show up with these individuals that are having this glycoprotein 120 expression. So, and I would argue the same would be true independent upon how that GP120 got into their system, whether that was a Paxlovid effect, or the virus effect, or the genetic vaccine effect. We know that interferon, alpha-2 beta, or the introduction of interferon, or the introduction of steroids, is beneficial for that. We also know that by those two drugs will increase body interferon, which decreases vascular endothelial growth factor, which helps with many of the other problems, the cancer, the prion disease, and the sudden cardiac death. So again, those drugs are very helpful in helping to mitigate or get things under control. And again, so once you've done that and this material is sitting outside of a cell, your body's immune system is going to have an inflammothrombotic response where it's going to go find it, pick it up, and try to get it out of there. And if you will do everything humanly possible to improve your health, you're giving your body a fighting chance to do that. Remember, these bodies have existed, these human bodies have existed for some time. Now, depending upon your theological preference or whatever, we're all going to have different timelines for that. But they didn't just pop up last weekend, okay? They have been functional and have helped human beings survive for some time. In fact, we have part of our immune system, the antibody system, that's a higher level species immune response. The lower animals don't have the adaptive humoral antibody response. They only have the T cell innate response. So we've got another layer that was added on to that. And I would argue there's some benefit to that, but it's both of those occurring and both of those being in balance, because we know that when they're not in balance, you end up with autoimmune diseases.
Yeah. So basically, you're saying it doesn't really matter how someone gets sick, so long as you support the immune system, you lower down, you stop this spike protein replicating inside them.
Right.
So I think that was the interferon. And then you give them every fighting chance. Their bodies, through nutrition and all their other choices, are going to to get rid of this foreign invader. We'll call it that.
Right. But everything that I talk about in those protocols, we've measured that effect. So we know it's going to happen. It's not just a computer model or a guess, because, those in silico computer models, they're only right 10% of the time. 10 cases where the computer says it's going to work. Only one time out of 10 does it work. Get 100 cases, 10 times that, So just because a computer model says that lock and that key should work, I think everybody's had the experience of taking a key, putting it into a lock, and oops, it doesn't unlock the lock, right? And unless everything works as it's supposed to, just because the two pieces of the puzzle look like they should fit together doesn't mean that there's going to be a response inside the human body to the benefit, right? I mean, all the drugs that are taken are the results of finding all the drugs that look like they should have worked that didn't. They all look like they were going to work, and they didn't. And it's not until you put all those combinations together and you actually measure the effect that you go, well, wait a minute, that drug that works because we can measure response, and the other 23 drugs here, well, they look like they should have, but they didn't. So toss those. We're not looking at those anymore. It's just one over here, right?
Yeah. So in terms of the spike, is there a difference in terms of the genetic vaccine and, the shedding, the transfection? Is there a difference in the spike, or is it exactly the same?
So there are some, there are some differences in the spike proteins that are being made compared to the original Wuhan HU1. And clearly with the new ones that they're coming out with, it's going to be different even than that. The interesting thing that I found when we looked at the analysis of the nucleosides that were there, they're nucleotides when you have the phosphate bond binding them together, but the adenine, cytosine, uracil, and guanine for RNA, was not so much that they matched as much as they ended up producing the right amino acid sequences. So you could have more than one codon triplet of nucleosides coding for different amino acids. And what they did is they changed, obviously the genetic vaccines don't use typical RNA because it's unstable. And that's what the Nobel Prize was just given to Wasserman and Kuritko, if I remember it correctly, from the 2008 work that they did, where they made pseudouridine, and all that was is they took uridine and flipped a carbon and nitrogen atom around in one of the rings, and that brought a hydrogen atom into play, and that made pseudouridine, and that's what the mRNAs are. So let's see, the names are Wasserman and Kariko, Kariko, with an umlaut over the O. And so they discovered three things. First off, it really made a very stable mRNA molecule. So they dealt with that. Secondly, it had a blunted immune response. When you measured interferon, it did not go up, which means they're completely useless as a vaccine, as we're talking about. Thirdly, it makes a great transfection tool. Now, though I chose those three phrases very specifically because they're actually in the published paper from 2008. They actually said these three things, right? And you can see the graphics on it. And I don't know, do we have screen share?
Yeah, I've got screen share.
Share screen, just a second. If you release that, let me do this.
Yeah, I've got screen share.
Okay, let me see if I can share my screen. Will it do that one? Let's see. Share. Does that show it? Do you see this screen?
Yes,
this one right here. Okay, there we go. This is the Kariko Wasserman paper from 2008. See, right down there, molecular therapeutics. And you can look at this so this psi means pseudo.
Yeah.
And so the pseudouridine, you can see not only with the measurement of pseudouridine and the non, which is the the normal. So here's the difference down here between uridine and pseudouridine. You can see they flipped the carbon and nitrogen atom around, and then that brought in a carbon and nitrogen atom, and it brought in a hydrogen atom for pseudouridine. It decreased the interferon and increased vascular endothelial growth factor. So here's alpha interferon. Hopefully you can see that. And you can see unmodified. So that's uridine. And pseudouridine, you see the drop in production of interferon, and then lipofectin is just for proof that it works. It's a liposomal injection. And then here's pseudouridine. You can see, so luciferase just simply means bright, shiny one. That's just the fluorescein that's put in there. So when you measure it, it lights it up. And you can see what happened. Here's the activity of the transfection going up in the pseudouridine compared to the gray bar, which is the typical uridine. So their paper, this is right out of it, says even at higher doses, only the unmodified mRNA, the uridine, was immunogenic.
Right.
I.e., the modified one wasn't, right?
Yeah.
And with nucleoside modification, enhanced the stability and translational capacity while diminishing the immunogenic, right? This pseudouridine mRNA, a promising tool for both gene replacement and vaccinating of the genes. And this is the work that they just got the Nobel Prize for.
It's incredible, isn't it? Something that doesn't all harm and no benefit.
Well, it's great as a transfection tool.
Well,
but it has, right? Okay.
It's good to pass things on, I guess, if you want to talk about, mass sending this out to the public, which brings me to another question, which they're just now marketing, which is the Novavax vaccine that just came out just approved a few days ago. They're marketing it as the, proton-based vaccine. So I guess they're trying to capture those people that don't want an mRNA vaccine into that. And
I heard people promoting this early on, and I have great concerns with it. So Novavax is nothing more than they took a virus that cannot infect people, but can infect arthropods like moths, MOTHS. So they took a virus, inserted the genetic code sequence for SARS-CoV-2 for the spike protein, injected it into moth cells, then harvested the spike proteins that were made, and added that together with saponification or soaps from trees as an irritant to inject in people. Now, I don't know what type of nightmares you have when you have nightmares, but nowhere in my wildest dreams did I wake up thinking, I think I should inject this into a virus that can only infect moths then harvest and inject into people and tell them that's a clever idea. So they were working on this technology long before then to come up with that. I don't know if you can see this little slide here. I thought I'd share it with you. Can you see this with the pseudouridine? That's on my screen. Do you still see my screen?
I've still got the original slide that you
let's see, new share. That's interesting. Okay, let me do that. I had not seen that before. So fascinating. I find that fascinating. Sorry about that, folks. Can you see it now? Do you see the pseudouridine?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a slide that you see pseudouridine, amyloidosis, ischemia, infarction. Okay. This is the slide that I put together for these recent talks where I'm pointing out over here, pseudouridine. The result is it's great for genetic transfection, decreased immune response, decreased interferon, increases VEGF as a result. It slows the slow potassium channels of the heart. That means it takes longer for the cells to recover. And in cardiology, we call that the refractory period. So it's effective or relative, which means it takes longer for it to recover.
Yeah, that's what you still talked about, sudden cardiac death.
Right. And then here in this red box is impaired conduction system. So you have the amyloidosis or heart damage, inflammation, inflammothrombotic response, or heart attack. further causes an increase in this refractory period, coming at it from two different directions now. When you do that, it increases your risk of abnormal rhythms from the bottom part of the heart. Now, over here in this right one is that if you increase the heart rate, which means you're saying you now get less time to recover by exercise, infections, stress or anxiety, or obesity and deconditioning, all of those will increase your heart rate, which gives you less time for your conduction, the electrical system of the heart to recover. This means less time, but the prion disease and the genetic vaccines both mean you need more time. So these are working against each other, and the end result is increased bad rhythms of the heart, either ventricular tachydysrhythmias or torsade de poids, that will end up with your heart suddenly stopping.
And so that's why we're seeing these sudden cardiac deaths, because normally, when people used to have heart attacks, they recover. I know plenty of people, heart attacks.
Just one piece over
here. They get treatment. They're still alive today, still playing golf, doing whatever. And nowadays, you don't really hear that people die in their sleep. You're hearing of teenagers dying in their sleep, children, sports athletes on the field, because of the stress and exercise is causing all of this, because the immune system has actually essentially been changed.
Yep.
Is that what I mean?
You increase the heart rate, it gives less time for that recovery period. And what you get from the damage from the spike protein to the heart, whether it's prion disease or not, and the genetic vaccines, is a need for more time to recover. You increase the heart rate, giving less time to recover. And in cardiology, we call that R-on-T phenomenon. And you end up with bad rhythms from the bottom of the heart that will kill you.
So essentially, if people are sick, they should be doing like walking. They shouldn't be out there, stressing their heart. I heard someone actually did one of those heart, stress tests, and they died doing a cardiac stress test.
And stress tests aren't that useful. And stress tests aren't that useful to begin with. I know because I've published on it, and the man who trained me was actually trained by Dr. Bruce of the Bruce protocol of the stress test.
There's really no reason to do a stress test other than, risking the fact that you could potentially die.
If you increase, you have a problem with the stress test, what does it mean? It means you could have a heart problem, a lung problem, you could be anemic, you could have a thyroid problem, you could just be physically deconditioned. Which is it? You didn't answer the question by doing the test, though you could increase the risk of killing somebody.
Yeah. And this is what, the Fleming method is trying to achieve, is to find out exactly what's wrong with the person and treat exactly what it is. Measure, basically, you use the treatment, measure it, and then, continue or adjust. Yeah. And this is not really what we get when we're doing, blood tests and so forth, because that only measures it when you're really sick or just about to die. It doesn't give you that accuracy that studying the tissues is. And is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. The question we have for every disease is what's going on at the tissue level, not what's going on downstream months or years later. Again, back to the student who was doing the report, who would say, well, Dr. Fleming, here's what the cholesterol level is. Well, you know what? When you come in during a stress circumstance, like having a heart attack, whatever your blood sugar and your cholesterol level is, it's been lowered due to the stress. The epinephrine has caused both the blood sugar and the lipids to go into the cells. So what you measured is actually lower than what it really is. And even then, it's an indirect look at something downstream.
Yeah. So we need to just try initially. Let's not go and wait till people are sick. People need to take sort of proactive action in the health right now, rather than, because obviously we can't rely on the hospital system as it stands. So if we're not sick, we need to do all those lifestyle changes, the dietary changes, to keep on top of our health, in terms, and then rather than go to you as a cardiologist and say, can I have a test to measure if there's something wrong with me? Yeah.
Right. Denton Cooley used to tease me, and when I first came out with that book, Stop Inflammation Now, I came back to Houston and did a presentation, a lecture for him. He said, he just patted me on the back. He says, "You do know you're not putting me out of business, right?" And I said, "Oh, I'm very much aware of that." Because until people decide that they want to do more than just talk about it,
Yes.
until they decide to take an active role in their own health. And I don't know why you wouldn't want to do that. I mean, I just, I'm 67. I haven't seen a physician. Well, I see one every day, but I mean, I haven't been to, the last time I was seen was as a resident back in the dark ages when we had to have a physical exam to join the residency program. And that was,
So
trust
you
me,
don't
that
do
was
the little
many
tests on
decades.
yourself. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, which is interesting because I know some people do like to have their medical tests, and it's a big business, especially even in terms of the alternative health, where they'll do food sensitivity tests and all of these things, which you know you could possibly sort of avoid altogether simply by doing all the right things in the first place.
right.
Um,
And I'm a big believer that a lot of information, cardiac wise, can be obtained on a clinical exam without having to do more diagnostic studies. But it is true, if you want to measure what's going on inside the body and get an earlier perspective, that's really what Fleming method is providing that answer to. Because part of my focus is to say, look, if we can tell you something early on and you can make a change, whatever diet or lifestyle or whatever that is, and you can avoid harm to the tissue, the organ, you can live a longer, healthier life, a quality life. And
yeah,
for people that are ending up with, for example, cancer, and to take the worst case scenario that everybody seems to always pick out, which is chemotherapy. I have argued that I think most people, if they had cancer and they were offered chemotherapy, and you could measure with Fleming method, because again, my method doesn't care who your drug company is. And it doesn't have an emotional response of reading the image to say, yeah, you're doing better, Mrs. Jones, I want to see you get better. Um, I would argue that most people will tolerate almost anything if you can prove to them that as a result, they're getting better
yeah.
and it's worth it. I mean, I think, maybe this is a parent's perspective, but I think most people would do that. And by the same token, the people who understand Fleming method, usually the first thing I hear from them is, "Oh, wait a minute. You're telling me that instead of spending 6 months of somebody's life and $150,000 on a treatment, and we don't know whether it's working or not, we could do one treatment and figure it out. And if it doesn't work, go to the next one and
Mm.
find what works." That's when I know that the physicians I'm talking to or the patients I'm talking to get what I'm doing.
Yeah. Okay, is there anything else you wanted to add to today's podcast? I know it's quite we certainly I'm certain there's probably going to be questions.
Yeah,
I don't know if you'd want to come back and ask if the audience has any questions from what we've said today. It's hard to know how people will receive it in terms of where they're at in terms of their medical knowledge and
sure.
understanding.
Yeah, no, if you want to, once this is released, let me know so I can see it too. And then if people have questions, we can schedule a time to go back and do the best we can to answer those questions for them.
Yeah, in
Again,
terms
I
of
don't.
conditions, I think what your website has the 3 videos, is that right? That you would recommend if you were a doctor, is that right? To go and watch those
Yes.
3 videos?
Yes. So Fleming, Fleming, method, Fleming method, all one word, no stuttering in Fleming, just one M. Um, there's a part 1, part 2, and part 3, and it walks through the science, and it's not a completely comprehensive, but for me, I was satisfied in doing it and presenting most of the pieces that physicians and scientists can look at and say, wow, okay, there's a lot of data that really exists. This makes sense. It follows what I was trained with. Oh, and now look, here we're talking about treatments on these pathways that we know are the problem, and this research shows that these treatments work, these medications and treatment approaches work on these pathways. And here, so I do it on 2 ways with that. So I do it by the pathways, and then I flip at the very end back to the physician model, which is the patient comes in with a problem with brain concerns or heart concerns or cancer concerns. How do you approach that with these drugs? But it's only after you walk through the steps so that it makes sense. So you're not winging it. You're going back to learning what you need to do.
The big picture.
You understand the big picture, and you're not guessing. You're not saying, gosh, they say this works. Does it work? No, here's the data. This works. We know this works. It's been measured. It works.
Yeah, so I recommend that, because I have started watching those. I've almost finished down to the last half hour. I would just say it's very, it's very challenging, even as a lot more challenging than the book. Stop Inflammation Now is actually a very good book if anyone wants it, but it's got a practical side, so you can kind of just skip to the practical side. But the actual, one of the interesting things I found in the book, which I thought I'd mention here, was that you were saying that in the cholesterol there is held often bacteria that can be released, I guess, when people are essentially, say, losing weight or say detoxing, and that could cause a variety of symptoms. And if you think, I was thinking in terms of COVID-19, when people have this, why perhaps some of the people who are overweight, who might have had pathogenic bacteria or viruses stuck within their cholesterol, and then when that's released, it might sort of create this inflammation. I'll use the word inflammation because it's just easier for me in the in the body. What do you think? Is that sort of a valid idea?
Well, that's certain for some people. That's certainly part of what plays a role for them. Not everybody. And that's part of what I've also tried to explain to people when they're looking at this unified theory. There are multiple factors. Not each of them play the same effect in each individual, but by being aware that these play a role, I have sometime explained this as kind of like a spider's web. If you have all these factors here on the web and you tug at it, the spider knows where the problem is. But you may distort the web a little bit here, you may distort it a lot here, or it may just be a little bit and it affects another part of the web, but altogether it has this effect so the spider knows where you're at. And so each of these different factors, of which there's 16 or 17 that I really talk about, although we talk about it as a dozen because that seems to be what people like. It's a number people like to resonate with. And there's a good 6 or 7 beyond that I don't include in there, that all of these play different roles in different individuals. And you have to figure out what's going on with you and address what's going on with you.
To just get your immune system back to shape and to full health again. So anyway, thank you very much, Dr. Fleming. I'll just end the recording now, and just let everyone know that all the links will be in the comments in the description, and we'll put a page together on the website. Thank you very much.
Perfect. My pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So thanks everyone for joining us today. It was an absolutely amazing episode. Please share this video widely. You can visit us at healthallianceaustralia.org. Subscribe, stay in touch, join us a member, support our work. We have other podcasts and articles published and are also active on LinkedIn. You can also subscribe to our YouTube and our Rumble channels. If you have any questions relating to today's podcast, please feel free to email them through via our website. Just a bit of full disclosure here. I actually am one of those SARS-CoV-2 victims, I guess you would call it that. I had COVID. It was pretty much nothing. And then 4 months later, I ended up in heart failure. Look, I've had heart failure before. It was a pre-existing condition. I'd been recovered for several years. So I'm not trying to scare anyone here. I'm just saying, and I've tried to raise awareness of this particular issue. As a health advocate, I actually get access to a lot of information, and a lot of people contact me, both who are jabbed, not jabbed, who have had shedding issues, who, and I've also got contacts with a lot of alternative health providers, and information about this particular, what Dr. Fleming says is a bioweapon. So I presented Dr. Fleming to you because I feel that he is the expert in this field. There are so many people out there claiming various things, and I have crystal clear of that information, because why would you go to, why do you need that information when you have so much information provided by Dr. Fleming through his websites, through his books, and through his videos? So go check them all out, judge it for yourself, judge for yourself the quality of information that you're able to access, that you're able to make important health decisions. And this is what I've done. I have had to make some very life and death decisions I've had to make about my health. I didn't have a margin for error. So, and I'm happy to report that using his this framework that I'm doing really well. Okay, thanks everyone. Bye.